You are listening to Verba Minute, where words do remain.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. I'm Vidar.
And I'm Tanfei.
And this is Inkling.
LinkedIn?
No, not LinkedIn. Inkling, a very serious book review channel aiming to understand the world through good writing. For the coming months, we will be exploring the study of inequality, which has become central to scholars of economics and sociology, particularly through the works of Thomas Piketty. We'll be going through and exploring topics related to gender discrimination, racial discrimination, class and social inequality, geography, discrimination suffered by disabled people, and exploring other parts of life where people are systematically disadvantaged and mistreated. And if there are any books or articles that you'd like us to review or talk about, please do let us know. We'll be starting off this series with the ambitious pick of Capital in the 21st Century, a book precisely by Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty is a French economist specialized in the study of wealth and income inequality. He's a professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, Paris School of Economics, and the London School of Economics. Beyond the book we'll be looking at today, he's also written a number of research projects and essays focused on the topics of wealth and income inequality, both in France and globally. And Capital and Inequality he's also written, which was published in 2019, and which he himself says it could be seen as in large part, a sequel to Capital in the 21st Century. And I'm here with Tanfei, who has actually read this book, the 750-page monstrosity. Not monstrosity, but it is a brick. So what are some words that you would use to describe your first impressions about this book?
Right. Thank you, Vidar, for the brilliant introduction. Okay, I'm going to use one word that's slightly less politically correct, which is fat. So the book is really a big guy. And it's really, really intimidating just by, holding it and looking at the size of it. It makes me not want to read it. But actually, after flipping through some of the pages, I realized that it's actually really reader-friendly. Many of the topics that are discussed in the book are very familiar topics, very relatable topics, not only to students of social sciences, but also just like a common Joe who is interested in knowing and understanding the society and how it works and how human communities come together and attribute like wealth and power and income and decide who should have what and like define what is yours and what is mine. So it's pretty approachable. So don't get put off by the looks of the book. And the last word that I would use is illuminating or illuminating.
Illuminating, I think.
Okay, illuminating. The book is really, really groundbreaking because it is presenting data that is commonly very hard to access for the public. And also in academia, we always talk about development in macro or microeconomics. We rarely talk about equity, equality, or fairness because those involve some very uncomfortable normative judgments in the classroom. So we never really dive into the mess of how we decide who should have what. And it's a very, very important question to ask, actually. And I think a normal, happy person wouldn't want to spend an afternoon combing through the data from the government or from any other statistical bureau or NGO to just, get a hang of how income and wealth is distributed in his or her own society. So this book really comes in handy as as a basis for anybody to get such knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the ideas of Piketty and the basis of this book have become widely discussed and very popular in both, especially in the field of economics. But some of the main ideas might seem kind of difficult, like from an outsider's perspective. So could you help us to break down some of the key ideas at the basis of this book?
Right. So the central theme to this book is that, as Piketty argues, when the rate of return on capital and accumulated wealth surpasses the rate of growth in an economy, wealth ultimately gets distributed unequally, and the pool of capital keeps on growing faster than national output, which is generated by labor. So, as Piketty says, and I quote, as Piketty argues, and I quote, in a quasi-stagnant society, wealth accumulated in the past will inevitably acquire disproportionate importance. And here, Piketty uses the word quasi-stagnant to refer to the decrease in population growth. The decrease in population growth rate, which means that labor is becoming even less significant in more developed societies that is relying on capital income to continue its economic development.
Right. So two main trends are important to observe in relation to this trend. And the first one is the greater role of capital in modern production. So that's in terms of automation, right? We see a lot more companies and different businesses using capital to a much greater extent than labor, and much more than they have done before. The other key trend is that of stagnating population growth that Tanfei just mentioned, which leads to lower economic growth as there's a smaller consumer base, less people to consume the product, or even if not smaller, at least not growing, and also the same case for labor. So put simply, Piketty says, decreased economic growth, especially demographic growth, is thus responsible for capital's comeback. So in relation to this trend of R being greater than G, which is at the key of this book, what are some of the effects that we're seeing in our current society? And how has this capital income ratio evolved historically?
Right. So the income inequality has increased sharply since the 1970s, with a particularly drastic increase in the share of total income going to the very highest earners, the 0.01% and the 0.1%, so to speak, in each economy. And income inequality in France and the US specifically follow a U-shaped curve in the 20th century. The dip came from the economic shocks and downturns that was imposed by the world wars, and also the economic depression and crisis that happened in the 20th century. So this leads to the central contradiction of capitalism, where the entrepreneur inevitably tends to become a rentier, more and more dominant over those who own nothing but their labor. Once constituted, capital reproduces itself faster than output increases. The past devours the future, as Piketty summarizes.
Yeah, so I think one central aspect that this all links to is that of social mobility, which Piketty also speaks about quite a bit, and the idea of meritocracy and so on. So could you develop on that? Like, how are these growing inequalities related to the idea of social mobility, and how does that make it more difficult to kind of work your way up in society, or achieve some sort of American dream, if as it were?
Right, yes. So my impression from this book is that as Piketty takes on the stereotypical case of America, we see that what we call the pay spine in the society getting steeper and steeper, which means that the top income bracket is rising further and further away from the bottom income bracket. And this steep income hierarchy does not promise an easier social mobility or a more flexible mobility adjustments along the spine, which means which basically means that the lower income earners are just looking at those who are earning a higher income than them and envying them and having not too much power in their hands to drag themselves up a level. And in general, I think it's quite a dystopian picture that Piketty is painting in the book, and with statistical support. Basically because of this meritocratic illusion that most of us are still living in, consciously or unconsciously, in universities, in companies, where we wish that we can, by our own effort and sweat and blood, climb up the hierarchy, climb up the ladders, and reach like somewhere that's more privileged, more respected, and more self-fulfilling. But actually, in real life, in the actual cases, we don't see much of that mobility still coming to fruition.
Right. And picking up on that, I think what's important is that it's kind of the structure of the economy is what is making this more difficult. So it's what we were talking about before, right? With the stored and accumulated wealth being privileged over people making money through their own labor.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why this is so harmful is because we still live in this meritocratic system, like you're saying, right? I think all of us at Sciences Po are deeply familiar with the idea of meritocracy, right? And being at an extremely, supposedly meritocratic institution. But the issue with this notion is that ultimately meritocracy attributes your success, but also your failure, onto you as a person. So if you get to the top of society, that's because you have drive, you have effort, you have grit, whatever words you want to use. But on the flip side, if you don't do that, it's because you lack those characteristics, right? You're somehow personally flawed. So that's why this is so important and so difficult, because we're seeing how the economy actually structurally makes it more difficult for these sort of social movements to take place. But then they're constantly being reinforced to us as well. So despite a lot of people not being able to make money through their labor, they're still being told, like, this is your fault, it's because you're not working hard enough, it's because you don't have the drive, you don't have the grit, you don't have all of these things that you're supposed to have. And this is what Piketty on page 527 calls meritocratic extremism. And it's something very difficult. But I think related to this discussion is also the idea of super managers that we were talking a little bit about before. So could you just explain that idea to us and how that relates to what you were talking about before with the super high wages for the top 0.1%?
Yes. So still, again, it's the American case that we are interested in here. The super managers are an entity that is very, very unique in the American economy, where it serves as a reminder to us readers that what Piketty is discussing about is not simply just like a further common development of what Karl Marx argued in his book on Capital. So in America, even though like the share of income from capital is increasing, just as most developed countries are experiencing, there is the income level, the salaries that goes to the top income earners is increasing in such a drastic way that puts America's economy in a completely different situation. And these super managers are usually credited by maybe their Ivy League education, stamps, their family backgrounds, their social relations, to be the elites of the society. And they hold managerial roles in top performing companies, which reward them with some might say overly deserved salaries. And this is also this is also illuminating as to how by mysterious pathways they land in these jobs that are so out of the reach of the common folks, and it's pretty interesting to see how the meritocratic system actually perpetuates privilege by taking in children from taking children from richer families into like these good institutions and giving them the leeway and the access to better lives later on. Yeah.
Right. And I think this is something that's specific to the US case. That's what he talks about, and also maybe more to Anglo-Saxon countries, if I'm not mistaken. But the main point is still that of the rise of capital, right? And the rise also of these rentiers, as he was talking about, people who very similarly, and he makes the comparison to novels like those from Honoré de Balzac, where he talks about these people in the 19th century, right, who basically just lived off the returns of their capital, so the land that they were owners of, and they didn't have to work. They just got all their money from that, and they were very well off thanks to that. And he's saying basically like how that is becoming more and more of a possibility in contemporary Europe especially. And so that leads to a number of implications if you identify that as a problem and you identify how that is going to undermine labor and people's ability to work for their money, right? And to make something of themselves, in quotation mark, through their labor.
Yeah.
But so if we identify this as a problem, why is it important? Why should we care about this? What's the issue?
So yeah, it's personally, I think it's a matter of motivation and hope, I think, because we all come in with a different list of privilege checks, and I would say that most of us have this urge or this yearning for something that is better, if not in our own generation, then for the next generation. That's the only drive for us to keep on hoping and keep on believing in life, actually. So I think if we know that this economy is turning everything valuable into inheritance and passing it on to a specific group of people, and they are only going to pass it around among themselves, it basically crushes my motivation to go to school tomorrow, knowing that I'll probably never make it, so it's slightly depressing. And I want to, as most of my friends and classmates in social sciences would want to see, the academia and the general society become more aware of these issues, and to open up the dialogue, to get access to accurate data, and to monitor how our societies and how our economies are developing and evolving, to maybe a more egalitarian or less egalitarian future as we see it in front of our eyes. And it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah. And I think more than monitor, also like tax.
Yeah. and also to regulate and to intervene.
Yeah, I think well, people can have different political opinions about how far you should go, but Piketty does recommend that, right? Like taxation as the solution for taxing wealth, basically, to redistribute this, given the structure of the economy. But he also talks about monitoring, like you were saying, and really like getting a sense of what this wealth is and where it is, because there's also the big issue of tax havens, right?
Yeah.
That he talks about in depth. Do you remember anything about that?
I actually don't. But yes, I actually don't remember much. Give me a like an excuse. It's a really long read, but the concept though is probably that certain regions or certain countries in the world have more favorable tax regulations for capitalists or investors to place their endowments or their investments in. So such a global atmosphere creates a race to the bottom kind of situation where all countries wish to attract more investments because, as we said, because the return on capital is higher than the growth rate. So as long as you can hold more investment and hold more capital, you can give like a boost to your own economy and make investment drive your economy faster than relying on human labor. And so basically all countries want to make their tax on a capital lower so that it attracts more foreign investment.
And that's an issue, right? Also when you see it from a national perspective, because we are living in a transnational era where it's very easy to shift money from and to various places in the world. And so, like for anyone believing in, a nation state and a national economy where the state kind of is able to appropriate some of the resources of these people, they need to be worried about that. They need to be worried about tax havens because it's so easy and it's really not monitored nowadays.
Yeah.
But I think one other important part of the implications from this rising inequality is also the political implication that it has, especially what we've been seeing in Europe, what a lot of people consider that certain regions and certain levels of social classes especially have gotten left behind and kind of excluded from the economic growth in the last decades, and where you see like incomes falling, and as a result mainly, or at least in correlation, you see also rising political extremism in a lot of countries. France is one of them, as we all are painfully aware of. And I think that's also something we need to realize, is like this sort of culture that blames the individual for not being able to advance in the economy, despite it being structurally more difficult to do so, ultimately won't, like, that will create a lot of resentment towards those people who are at the top of that system. And I think that's kind of the anti-elitist sentiments that we're seeing in Europe, in the US, probably in other countries as well that I don't know as well. But yeah, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. I think it reminds me of this idea that democratic habits requires maintenance, and it is very dangerous when this resentment is turned into disengagement. it's very difficult for those who feel disengaged, who feel marginalized, who feel detached, to pick up the strength and the faith and the trust in the institution again, and practice actively in the democratic process again. So I think, as you said, as we misconstrue privilege as merit, as we misconstrue disadvantage as inabilities, it is very, very alarming, and the psychological cost of social mobility will also be higher.
Yeah.
And for them, it is so easy to just snap and disengage.
True.
Yeah.
And just one last point that I want to add, and one thing that's interesting about this, I wrote a paper on it last year, is how this sort of meritocratic discourse, what often happens is that when meritocracy is actually like less present, when it's less possible for you to make the kind of have the kind of class mobility that you had, especially in the post-war era in Europe, in the Belle Epoque in France, and I know in Sweden when we were building up the welfare state, you know, in the decades after. Those were times where it actually was more possible to, you know, going from being the son of a worker to going to a different, you know, higher position in society. But now that's less possible. But what comes out of that is that there's more focus on meritocracy. Sorry, there's more of a discourse and a focus on meritocracy, and you see like especially in like what I was focusing on in my paper and what I'm personally interested in is like culture and hip hop, and you see a lot of that discourse, like people coming from very low social levels and then making money and then showing how that's kind of like, you know, I made it, and they're held up as an example, like, oh, if this person made it, like they came from this really bad area of this city and they still now like they're at the top of the society, they're held up as an example and say like this person worked hard and they were, you know, they had all these virtues that you're supposed to have in the capitalist system to make it, and so they made it. But in fact, those stories are becoming rarer and rarer. They're just getting more attention when they actually happen. And I think that's something interesting, which Piketty doesn't talk about, but it's an extension of those ideas.
Yeah, it's purposefully or not, it might be a publicity stunt that is like cherry picked to be held up as an exception, but more generalized into an argument that if they can make it, so why can't you?
Yeah,
it's
because the discourse is about meritocracy become even stronger, right? Like all this stuff about grit and grind and hustle and all this kind of stuff that we're painfully familiar with.
Yeah, and the toxic productivity chamber.
Exactly.
You know, study with me 2 hours on YouTube.
Yeah, or like 10 hours. Yeah.
Okay, or like 25. You know, we have in the music community, there's like an ongoing joke about Ling who practices 49 hours a day just to become the best violinist. For those who know about this joke, I feel sincerely sorry that it exists. But yeah, and also more concretely, the model minority theory of Asians being, you know, being fast adapters who can become economically and academically. Bleh. Is that a word?
Yeah, it is a word. Yeah.
Okay, but basically they become socially advantaged within fewer generations than other minority groups, and they are held up as the model. To basically pit the disadvantaged against the disadvantaged, when we actually should focus on the entire system and how privilege is distributed and merit is credited. Yeah, for
sure. I definitely agree. So it's been a really interesting conversation. Before we wrap up, do you have any last reflections to leave us with from the book? Like, what are you gonna carry with you? What's like one of the things that you feel you'll remember from reading this book, like, I don't know, 5 years down the line?
Right. Actually, I think despite its like size and clumsiness in appearance, I think the book is really, really elegantly written. Many of the graphs are so easy to understand and so straightforward. You see the comparison between return to capital and growth in income into line graphs, like very succinctly represented. You see the growth of the top 1% versus the bottom 50%, the disparity, the U-shaped curves. All these graphs are super easy to digest, and I feel like it made me more faithful, or like more trusting of quantitative methods of analysis and how it can be incorporated into painting this holistic narrative about our society, and making it both scientific and compelling and relatable.
For sure, definitely.
What about you?
I think that's a really good point, and I think that was also what stuck with me is, and I think he talks more about this in Capital and Ideology, which I haven't read. It's even more of a brick. That one's 1,000 pages. But it's how you can have a quantitative basis for your ideas, but then from that build really compelling political and social arguments that are based on facts and based on, you know, the reality of the situation. And yeah, I think I'll take away mainly this idea that things are structurally like becoming less and less in the favor of the majority of people. And that's what's important.
Yeah.
So I think with that, unless you have anything else, we can wrap up this episode. Thank you all for listening. I hope your February days in LH are passing smoothly, and until next time.
Take care.